Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished professional from the world of agri-tech from Cambridge, UK, Dr. Sachin Shende. Sachin, welcome to the show.
Hello, Ashutosh, and really thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and a real pleasure to come on your podcast. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Shende is the Chief Executive Officer of FarmSetu Technologies, India, which is a full-stack agri-food supply chain management platform focusing on the Indian agri market. He's also a technology entrepreneur who grew up on a farm. So, Sachin, before we talk about FarmSetu, tell me a little bit about your own amazing journey in brief.
Okay, so I'm a farmer's son. I grew up on the farm, studied agricultural engineering as my first degree because it felt at that point of time that it was a family tradition to study something related to agriculture, coming from a farming family. So I took that obvious path, which my father and a few other members of my family had already taken, and went to MPKV in Rahuri. And something interesting happened there. When I was in my third year of engineering, I fell in love with computers and realized actually that is a tool which can solve quite a lot of problems. So I started spending initially some time in terms of learning computers and learning software and how to kind of solve little problems using software tools. And that journey kind of it kind of went on from there. And through my master's program, I got to know a little bit more about computers and software. And literally since 1999, I have spent pretty much all of my career either building software tools or building software products. In last 10 years, probably my journey has been mainly in startup ecosystem, primarily on the early stage startups. So within kind of mid of my career, I kind of switched from corporate to being an academic. So I went to do my PhD to UK, and that's how I landed in UK. And after finishing my PhD, I worked in financial industry for about 7.5 years. So I started with Barclays Global Investors and then went into BlackRock. And I worked as a quantitative developer, landed on bonds trading desk without knowing what bonds are. It was interesting. So yeah, so if I look back, so farming and agriculture is really the first kind of my passion. Second is really software. Third is finance. And fourth is building companies, building products and technologies. And within that, I think primarily my career has been in last 10 years, I've been focusing mainly on agri-tech and solving problems in agriculture using digital tools. So yeah, that's kind of really a high level and quick summary of my journey so far.
Amazing, thank you. So let's talk about FarmSetu Technologies. Sachin, tell us a little bit about FarmSetu Technologies and what is your core mission?
Sure. So starting with core mission, agriculture is important from every single aspect for our as a society, and we feel like agriculture is at the forefront of tackling effects and mitigating effects of climate change. So really, we believe that the current supply chains, agri-food supply chains, they need to be sustainable. And when I say sustainable, not just sort of environmentally, but financially as well. So for us, definition of sustainability is economical as well as environmental sustainability. And that's really sort of our starting point here to why should we build a technology and for what. So once you kind of zero down on that theme, what we're doing at FarmSetu is really a full stack agri-food supply chain management platform. So this is a software platform. We are a software company, or a product software company. And we sell our software to other agri-businesses. So effectively, we are a B2B software solutions company. Although we sell into other agri-businesses, our primary end users are farmers. And farmer is really our center of universe because they are the most important player in the agri-food supply chain.
Well said.
And hence, that's our starting point. And what we're doing is, we are connecting, or we're building the software tools which can then connect everything within the supply chain. So we start with the on-farm systems. Then we have, a digital marketplace which our clients can use. And then we move to trading tools, financial tools, and traceability solutions. So effectively, it's an end-to-end supply chain stack. So the one main thing to note here is we are a pure technology player. We do not do any supply chain activities like selling agri inputs or purchasing a produce or trading the produce or commodity in the market. So our role is purely to develop technology and sell technology. Yeah. Our clients do all of the supply chain activities.
I understand. Absolutely. But, when you're developing software and it's being used to handle end-to-end supply chain challenges, what, in your view, are some of the big challenges India's agri-food supply chain faces today?
Okay. So to answer that question, I'd like to set a little bit of context here.
Okay.
And for that, I'd like to give an analogy of bank account, because we all understand what bank accounts are. And in a nutshell, we deposit some money, we withdraw some money, right? So if the amount of money which we withdraw over time is less than the money which we deposited, we are net positive and we have positive balance in our bank account. If we withdraw more than what we have deposited, then obviously our account is overdrawn, right? So now, if you think agri-food supply chains are like a bank account, that bank account balance at the moment is overdrawn, and not by any small margin, but by a really, really big margin, right? And what I mean by that is effectively as a business, as a profit-making activity, we are benefiting from the supply chains. We are making profits from the supply chain, but we are not adding net value back to the supply chain.
Okay.
Right? And hence that area is overdrawn, in a way. We're extracting more benefits than we are adding back to the supply chain. Right? So that's the overarching thing in terms of the challenges. Okay? So because of that situation, what has happened is, we are then not ready to tackle the challenges like the climate change, the variability in the weather, which is happening because of the climate change effect, right? And some of the market volatility which is happening because of that, because these are like really big challenges, and we have to really think in a holistic way, right? So that's the kind of really context. That's a little bit of background. Now, obviously, your listeners would like to hear that. Okay, then tell us, like, what are the specifics within those challenges, right? So with that theme, I think at a farmer end, if you look at the supply chain, so what we call is like upstream end of the supply chain, which is a primary production. That's where farmers are. That's where the crops are grown, right? So at that end, we have excessive cost of cultivation. And that has happened because of excessive use of agrochemicals. Since Green Revolution, I think farmers were introduced to fertilizers, to other agrochemicals like crop protection and so on, right? However, the extension didn't really kind of reach to that farm level, or it reached in early stages, but that mechanism was dismantled, right, over time. So what has happened is the cost of cultivation has gone high, and because of the excessive use of agrochemicals, fertilizers. Also, we are facing this labor challenges. And when I say labor challenges, it's not just the availability of the labor, but also the skills which we have. So lack of skilled labor, and even lack of skilled farmers, because with the as we are passing in the time, we have different challenges, and I don't think so farmers are really equipped in terms of the skills to face those challenges. So broadly speaking, at one end we have this excessive cost of cultivation or cost of production. Then the second is really the availability or lack of skilled laborers and lack of skilled farmers. And then finally, I feel like there are sort of certain other elements which are play here, which is market access and availability of farmers to sell their produce in the markets. Although that market problem is multifold, and I think some of that is comes from the lack of awareness of the farmers,
Mm.
or lack of training of the farmers. I feel like in general, like probably there is some issue with the having many more access points to farmers to take their produce, and go and sell that produce. So those are some of the broad challenges at a upstream
Very
end.
interesting.
And
But tell me, sorry, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Sorry, at the midstream and downstream end, I'll just wrap it up. So we have some challenges in terms of lack of proper supply chain infrastructure, like pack houses, cold storages, and again the skilled staff to manage the supply chains. So that is another big problem at the midstream and downstream end.
Very interesting. But since you're working out of the UK, you're obviously looking at many other markets as well. How are the challenges in India different from other global markets?
Okay. So just to be clear, I mean, some of the markets which I have seen and operated in, they do have their own challenges. There is a common theme across all the markets where weather patterns or changing weather patterns really has caused issues. So if you look at this year is unique in terms of the fresh produce supply chains. So take a look at South Africa, Chile, Peru, Morocco, for example. So all of these are like some of the major horticultural exporters to UK, Europe, and United States as well. And they all kind of grappling with some of these challenges this year. Coming back to India and how different they are, I think that theme continues in India as well. But apart from that, I think a lot of other challenges are coming from this lots and lots of smallholder farmers, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, what happens is we then have any change which you would like to introduce in the supply chain means that's going to take some time, and we have it's kind of a little difficult to introduce those changes in terms of the policy or cropping pattern. So that's kind of one thing. So lots and lots of smallholder farmers. Second thing is in other developed economies, the supply chain and the produce which is traded in the supply chain is well specced out, meaning the customers, they have asked as a consumers that this is what I want. So let me give you an example. Like let's say take example of potatoes. In India, we have potatoes broadly, right? Well, as you know, if you walk in a supermarket in Europe or any other country, you have different types of potatoes. Correct. So there are potatoes for salads, and there are potatoes for crisping or chipping. There are potatoes for baking. There are potatoes for boiling or mash. And what they mean is they have different size, they have different tests, they have different skin finish. So those specs are very different on those potatoes, right? And as a supply chain, I think those specs are well defined, whether they're potatoes or onions or grapes or berries or whatever produce it is, right? And that means farmers know what kind of produce they're growing, right? And for whom. So that does not exist in India. I mean, that's coming through, but that's kind of very recent development. And primarily, that's mainly in the export oriented products, like, for example, table grapes. So the specs are known by the farmers, and they grow the specs, within that, within the specified, parameters. So that's kind of, another big difference as compared to global markets. Then, there's this concept of the whole sort of training, skills, agronomy. So that's kind of another one which we kind of briefly touched on in the previous question. Other one is really sort of the variability in or availability of the produce and consumption of it. So if you look at the consumer basket and what they purchase in developed economies, there's a significantly higher proportion of fruits and vegetables in that basket, while we don't have that much, here in India, right? And I feel there is a big room for growth in terms of as a country or as a society, the quantity or the way we consume fruits and vegetables.
Right.
And I think that will significantly help farmers and the supply chains here once that starts growing up. And obviously there are health benefits as well to the consumers. So those are some of the big differences.
This is absolutely fascinating. And my next question is that, with the increasing use of IoT, artificial intelligence in areas of agriculture, How are you adapting or integrating these technologies so that the farmer benefits?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So, as a platform, what we call is like, we have something called as connect. So connecting different actors in the supply chain. So farmers and enterprises, different assets in the supply chain, like the farms, the fields, the crops, the pack house, and pretty much everything within that. Once you connect, you start collecting the data. And once you start collecting the data, then you start optimizing certain things in the supply chain. And I'll come back later, in like what exactly I mean by optimizing. But to answer your question, so IoT plays or will play a significant role in that connection and collection part of what we do as a platform. Typically, like as a technology player, we would like to collect the data without any human intervention, right? Because as soon as you put humans in the ecosystem, then you have delays, you don't have consistency, you have errors and all of that. While as if you have sensors and if there is the communication kit attached to it, then we get data pretty much consistently until like something goes wrong with that. But then we get alerted and we can go and fix it. So IoT is really like a big in terms of for us is in that connecting the different in the supply chain and collecting the data. And once you collect the data, we can do something with that, right? At the moment, it's limited to weather stations and sensors related to soils. But over time, this will be an IoT kit on the farm machinery, harvesters, and pretty much everything within the supply chain.
Fascinating. My next question to you is that when you look at the quality and traceability of products reaching the end consumers, does FarmSetu play a role to support farmers there as well?
Yeah, certainly. So going back to what I said about FarmSetu, we're a technology player, and our clients are supply chain players, and who actually then buy produce from farmers and then pass it on to the supermarkets or retailers, or they themselves retail. Right. And if you look at that, transparency and traceability in the supply chain is a big aspect. So, this was about 15, 20 years back. I had a very different attitude, even coming from a farming family. You just buy produce, whether it's a fruit or vegetable, without knowing what has gone behind it, right? And I feel like as a consumer, we need to be aware of where the food is grown and what has happened to that food, right? And I feel like from the consumer angle, the traceability and transparency tools which are providing to our clients and to consumers indirectly will play a big role, where actually you can see behind the brand. Who are these farmers? Who are these faces who are really working hard, no matter what season it is, right? They're working hard to make sure that the food which is grown arrives on your table, right? And there are various steps in between, right? So after harvesting, that produce is handled or processed by a certain processor, right? So it's a long journey. And as a consumer, I think, those technology tools will help understand the supply chains better. See what farmers do with the produce, where the produce has come from. But most importantly, try and understand like really the environmental footprint of that produce. Like, what was the water consumed? What are the agrochemicals consumed? Because I feel like as a consumer, we need to have an awareness around that. And if the produce which has got the chemicals, agrochemicals, below their threshold limits, and that is something which would like to kind of make sure that the residue levels are within the limits through our technology. So from the consumer perspective, that's really an important piece of technology. And actually, we are using that for our seed and other supply chain network as well, where farmers can actually then be sure about the seeds and where those seeds are coming from, and they are from a genuine, authentic source.
Fascinating. So, Sachin, I have time for two more questions. My next question is that how does FarmSetu differentiate itself from so many other people who claim to have very strong supply chain platforms?
Okay, and that's interesting. And this is something which, I keep on listening in market. I feel like, to start with, I'll say like we're purely a technology provider, technology player, and not a trader under hoods of technology. So that's what kind of a lot of people are actually, they're analog traders. but they claim to have technology and they claim to be an agri-tech player without having the necessarily might or without having necessarily R&D efforts vested in to build the technology for the supply chain, right? So I feel that's probably the starting point. Second is really like, what we do is, we as a technology provider, we work very closely with our clients. And when I say closely, specifically on people, process, and technology layer. So it's not like, as a company, we don't say like, oh, this is a software platform, we're going to train you, and then you start using it. Actually, we got much more deeper connection with our clients than what I said. And, that involves, kind of upskilling their own staff, kind of evolving their process layer so that they can get maximum benefit out of this technology implementation when they deploy this technology in their own supply chain stack. So that's probably the second reason. Third is our people. I think our people probably is by far the biggest differentiating factor in the industry. So we are not only sort of experienced in this digital agri-tech field, but our approach in terms of how we see the supply chains need to be today and tomorrow, and having that expertise to develop necessary tools to solve the problems on the ground, on the supply chain. I think that we understand and know better than other players in the industry. I think those are probably the three key factors where we differentiate ourselves. And probably there's one more, which is, I think we've taken a pure platform approach here. So we're almost like an operating system. Right. Now, there are certain companies who claim to have a platform, but apart from that, we also differentiate in terms of the point solutions. We're not point solution. We are end-to-end solution provider to the agri-food companies. Specifically in the crops, we don't do anything in livestock and aquaculture. Our universe is really crops at this point.
Very interesting. And my last question to you, Sachin, and this is, given the knowledge you have of this business, how do you see the evolution of the agri-food supply chain in India? And where do you see FarmSetu 5 years from now?
Okay. So I feel like we're at an inflection point where we are transitioning from sort of unorganized, non-digitized supply chains to organized, digitized, fully digitized supply chains, right? And I think that transition has only just started. In certain crops, it has started a little bit more aggressively than other crops. But I think, in the next 5-10 years, we will see a significant shift in terms of the way the produce is grown, the way the crops are grown, the way they are harvested, stored, sold, aggregated, and then sold to consumers, either in a fresh or processed format, right? So I think that's one big part where we will see the supply chains getting pretty much organized and digitized. And I also see what happened in the landline telephony space, where country like India, we actually sort of skipped the entire landline journey and went straight to mobile phones, right? So in Western countries, the supply chains were organized in analog way, and now they're digitizing it, right? While as in India, what will happen is they will just organize and digitize probably in the same step. So we won't have that intermediate step. So that's probably one big shift which I think will happen. Second is at the consumer end, I feel like the way the retail is getting reorganized, we will take out the seasonality in the produce, right? And what will happen is consumers will start demanding every single produce available on the supermarket shelf or retail shelf, pretty much 52 weeks of the year, right? And that means, we will have to sort of, connect with the global supply chains, but also build our own capabilities and capacities within the country to serve the domestic market, right? But that's probably another big shift, which I think will happen. Thirdly, I think the agri-tech is going to accelerate all of that. I think, since 2015, 16, the significant number of companies which are in the market. and which are trying to address different challenges, different pain points in the supply chain. So that's probably like another big area which will change and which will evolve the whole entire supply chain, right? So probably those are some of the big key areas.
Yeah.
And where FarmSetu will be, I think our intention, our ambition is really to develop and create resilient, fully digitized, sustainable crop supply chains, right? So that's kind of our vision, right? So in next 5 years, I feel like we would have, within our 6 to 7 core crops, we would have done a significant development and establishment of those supply chains. We have within that crop, 6 to 7 crops, we would have probably around 50, 60 significant players using our technology. And through those players, through those agri-food companies, we would have network of about 4 lakh, 5 lakh farmers using our technology. So that's where I see, and through that we see like significant shift in the way we grow the produce, and also the shift in terms of the skills and availability of these farmers in the supply chain. So that's probably like what I think will happen in next 5 years from FarmSetu's perspective.
Fascinating. And on that note, Sachin, I just want to say thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for speaking to me at such length about your own journey, about FarmSetu Technologies. I learned many new things from you about farming, about all the challenges being faced, not just in India, but across the world, and how you are solving for such problems so that the farmer and the consumer benefits. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. It was a real pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.